Hi, everyone. I'm Sam Osterhout, and it is time again for Unholy Ground with Andra Watkins and me, the show where we peel back the curtain on white Christian nationalism. If you dare to peek in, Andra, how are you doing?
I'm good today. I hope everybody else is too. It hasn't been the most fun week, but we can come back to that at the end and talk about how we move forward.
Yeah, and I want to talk about at the end for sure. There's a national boycott, general boycott happening tomorrow through the weekend, and it feels like a small token, but you've been talking about boycotts for a long time. So let's talk about that at the end. Save it for the hope part, because after this conversation, we're gonna need it. Your Substack has been, we always talk about you being the sort of translator of all of this stuff, but really, in some cases, I feel like you're the connector of dots. The threads that don't seem connected are actually connected. And I want to talk today about an EPA directive regarding hormones in drinking water, and connect that to a Tennessee resolution replacing Pride Month with Nuclear Family Month, which is actually a thing that's happening. And also the executive order known as NSPM 7. Now, you've been predicting and writing about the convergence of all of these things for a long time. And it feels like finally people are kind of paying attention. And so in one of your pieces today, you mentioned that back in July of 24, almost 2 years ago, you wrote that Christian nationalists would come for all contraception, not just abortion pills, but oral birth control. And at the time, almost no one was saying that out loud. Like, you were really among just a one small voice in a sea of people saying, you're screaming that the sky is falling. So what did you see then that other people missed?
Well, I grew up in the world of Christian nationalism, as a lot of our regular viewers know here at Unholy Ground. And so I was taught in that world that hormonal birth control pills caused abortions. I was taught in the 70s and 80s that hormonal birth control pills, the oral birth control pill, was an abortifacient, which is what these groups are saying now and what the regime is saying. They allowed a bunch of contraception that was earmarked for aid in Africa and other places to be destroyed in Europe because they said it was abortifacient birth control. They're actually attaching the word abortifacient in front of the words birth and control. So these groups all teach that all contraception is an abortifacient. And you can check me on this. You can go and do an internet search for abortifacient birth control, and you will hit multiple types of these groups that list what they believe are abortifacients, and it always includes the oral birth control pill, and they always list why they think it's an abortifacient. So they've been saying that since before 2024. Because I grew up in that world and was not allowed to have the pill myself as a teenager to combat my horrible cramps that I had, I knew that they taught that. So when I wrote that in 2024, and I would go on other people's Substacks and be like, you're just talking about emergency abortion pills and Plan B, and it's going to be so much more than that, and we really need to be warning people, and nobody would.
Nobody
would.
It feels like a stretch, but I want to just, before we move on, talk about what oral contraceptives actually do, because I think it's worth remembering that they aren't abortifacients, right? That's not their purpose. They don't kill babies.
No, they suppress ovulation.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it is usually some type of estrogen and a progestin, which is a synthetic progesterone. And that combination of hormones suppresses ovulation. So you're not having this case like in other types of birth control where, you know, they say you're creating a hostile environment in the uterus such that a fertilized zygote cannot attach to the uterine wall, because as soon as that union happens, that is a human being, Sam, and you're killing it, even if even if it's not attached in there.
Right.
So, you know, that's how they talk about some of these other types of systems that actually prevent attachment as abortions.
Yeah.
But hormonal birth control pills prevent that process from happening.
Right. Okay. So talk me through what's actually happening at the EPA, because it's like, it seems, I always say, you know, a lot of their policies are these weird bank shots, right? It's not just like, let's just cancel birth control, right? Just put up a bill that says nobody can have birth control, period. No pun intended. And let's ban condoms. Like, get rid of condoms, although they probably wouldn't do that because that's for men. Instead, they're like, we should be testing water supply. So what is this EPA situation that's happening right now?
Well, you know, we have to give a little tiny bit of background, so bear with me. Groups like Students for Life, which is a very aggressive anti-abortion, far-right extremist Christian nationalist group, have realized that to get younger people on board with some of these things, they have to say we care about the environment. If they frame it in this way of something's harming the environment, then they can maybe get more younger people to care about it than if they say the birth control pill is causing abortions, and we don't like that. So this has been a plan that has been several years in the making, where they have been going on college campuses, talking in their Students for Life groups, pushing this out to other kinds of anti-abortion groups, and putting that out in their communities, and talking about how these hormones are harming groundwater and our drinking water. And so it's harming the environment. Right. If you look around on the internet, you can find MAHA types who are saying, there are so many female hormones in the water that it's feminizing people.
And Alex Jones are turning gay all over
Alex Jones started that conspiracy theory more than a decade ago, but you do see that peppered out throughout the MAHA movement of how these hormones in the water are harming people. And I'm not here to say that things getting into the water supply can't be harmful. I'm not saying that, but they have hit upon this because their particular group, Students for Life, are students. So they think this is a better message to try to get across to them. And they've built an impetus over several years. And now that they have a pliable regime in power, they can actually put forth this, let's make the EPA will agree with us that we need to test the groundwater for these hormones now and see how much they're polluting our drinking water.
And
that's the background on how.
And there's a goal there, right? There's an objective in that testing, and that's where this gets pretty white Christian nationalist.
Yeah, I mean, as I write in my piece today, and today's Thursday, we're recording on Thursday for a Sunday run. So as I write in today's piece, hormonal birth control pills contain an estrogen and a progestin. Typically, not always, but typically. As a menopausal woman, every night before I go to sleep, I swallow a progestin pill and put on an estrogen gel cream, gel.
Sure.
If they tested the water supply for that, they would detect those hormones, but they would not be able to tell whether they came from an oral birth control pill or a menopausal hormone replacement therapy. they can tell the individual types of estrogens and progestins that are in the water, but they can't tell where they came from. So my hormone replacement therapy could also be said, oh, well, that's polluting the water supply also.
Sure.
As well as transgender women who need hormone replacement therapy for their own gender affirming care. They would be using similar products to what I'm using for menopause.
So, and that's the bank shot, right? It's saying, well, we need to make sure there's no pollutants in the water, right? Disregard methane, right? Disregard PFAS, which they, want to let corporations just run rampant with. Disregard all of the other pollutants that this administration has said, no more testing because it's going to hurt our economy. They want to take away your hormones, right?
Only female hormones.
Well, this is the point I was going to get to. So let's say, okay, fair. We should have testing. Like let's find out. Like data is always good. We can always have data. The right they only want the right data, right? But let's have the data. Except there's a catch. And the catch is they're not going to test for testosterone.
No, they did not update their list of required testing things for testosterone. It was only for female hormones.
And that's the whole story.
Yeah.
So just to back this up and to put this into context for everyone out there, they are testing for hormones that go into female contraceptives and that help women premenopausal and menopausal and postmenopausal women who have, by the way, never received any treatment or any services or any support for that massive and incredible life change that every one of them goes through until the past 10 years. And they, rather than test across the board, rather than all of this, rather than have support for women, it is no. So it almost feels like the cruelty is actually the point here.
Yes, and when I wrote about this 2 years ago and again last year, when a reader directly asked me, are they going to outlaw hormone replacement therapy? What do you think? And I wrote about that in September of 2025 and said they absolutely will, because they believe, because of Adam and Eve sinned first and tempted Adam to fall with her. I feel like I say this every single week on here.
Yes.
It is a woman's calling to suffer. God cursed Eve with pain in childbirth. And they extrapolate that out to all the various and sundry things that happen because you have a reproductive system that can, incubate a human being, that's all part of that curse. So premenstrual syndrome is part of that curse. Menopause is part of that curse. Perimenopause is part of that curse. Postpartum depression is part of that curse. All of the things that women have to deal with as part of being a woman and having a uterus and ovaries are part of that curse. And so giving women relief is against God's design. And that is a lot of what these churches teach if you go into these churches. You shouldn't be giving women relief for that, because you should be suffering the consequences that God designed into our system and bearing that with joy and humbleness and gratitude is part of what God designed for a woman, and she should just endure all of that. That's what they believe.
Endure. Right. And this is, if you're just tuning in, this is Unholy Ground with Andrew Watkins and me, Sam Osterhout. We're talking about how a quiet EPA directive on drinking water connects to a Tennessee resolution outlawing pride, which we're going to get to next. I think this show could also be called How White Christian Nationalists Blame Women for Everything, right? Because it always, as someone who didn't come up in the tradition, who's a sort of interloper into your world and is peeking in really along with our audience, And also as a white man who's had to suffer almost nothing in my entire life, which is not totally true. I've suffered plenty, but like relatively speaking, I got it really easy. The white Christian nationalists, the men asking women to endure everything while they endure literally nothing is what this everything is all about. And I want to talk about Tennessee's, it's called HGR or HJR 182. And it feels like, on its surface, just another sort of culture war, symbolic anti-pride proclamation. But you argue that it's actually a blueprint. So I'm going to put this up. What is the move? First of all, it starts, whereas the nuclear family, consisting of one husband, one wife, and any biological, adopted, or foster children, is God's design. By the way, this is a state proclamation for familial structure and has been the bedrock of society since the creation of the world. This is a government document.
Which is Genesis, which is what I was just talking about, creation of the world. Yeah.
Yep. So look, this isn't just some culture war thing. What's really going on here? And talk about what this is actually declaring.
The state of Tennessee proposed this joint resolution, and Bill Lee signed it a couple weeks ago, maybe last week, declaring that the month of June will be Nuclear Family Month in the state of Tennessee, not Pride Month. So celebrating Pride in the state of Tennessee, while individual people may do it, the state will be celebrating Nuclear Family Month. And so they use the Project 2025 Heritage Foundation terms. One man and one woman are a nuclear family with children, either had, adopted, or fostered. So they use that definition, which the Heritage Foundation then carried over into their Project 2026, is what I'm calling it, which the biggest part of that is Saving America by Saving the Family,
right,
which I have covered extensively on my Substack as well.
A lot about it on the show as well.
Yeah. So, that is where this comes from. And I wouldn't be surprised if someone at the Heritage Foundation or Alliance Defending Freedom or some such wrote this proclamation for them. That's how these groups work. So that is the proclamation. And a lot of LGBTQ groups covered this as an attack on that community and the trans community. And of course it is. But the biggest part of this proclamation is 11 lines devoted to fatherlessness.
Yeah, all these stats and just wild claims, and you traced all of that back to the America First Policy Institute, right?
Well, the America First Policy Institute is a partner with the Heritage Foundation. They contributed to Project 2025. They are another far-right, billionaire white Christian nationalist funded think tank. And so, when a group like that uses stats, they either pull them from a government website, which today is, the Heritage Foundation.
Oh my God,
and those groups are probably building those.
Government website.
Right. Either the National Institutes of Health they used a shooter website for Dr. Peter Langman, who has studied mass shootings, and how they present his findings in this document is very deceptive. Right. Compared to what he actually says about school shootings. He actually attributes them to poverty, not fatherlessness, like they conclude. So, but they don't give you a site for anything. So I went on and found that document and linked to it so that people could check these stats themselves if they want to, because they never give you stats like where this came from, because they're misrepresenting them. Of course. So when you see stats listed in a document like this, you always have to say, because of who put it together, they're misrepresenting them. So, but the point of all of those stats was to talk about the blight of fatherlessness.
Yes.
And, you could make the argument that, well, gee, wow, then they should be delighted that two men are married and in a loving relationship and have children, because more fathers,
so many fathers and so much testosterone in our water. That sounds like an amazing weekend to me.
But that's not the argument they make, because that, a marriage, a nuclear family is one man married to one unrelated woman with children. Yes. That's the only family.
I'll put that up again, just so you can see. We're not saying this. They are saying it.
Right. So, the whole paragraph that is you see it starting at the whereas fatherless families are 4 times more likely. That's the longest whereas in this document.
Yeah.
That's supposed to be attacking the LGBTQ community and the trans community and doing away with pride. Right. All of which are bad. I'm not diminishing those things. But in my work this week, I wanted to point out how the president coming out and saying that the shooter at the White House press event was anti-Christian is an NSPM-7 dog whistle.
Yes.
For all of these things in NSPM-7 that they are going to try to attack as, dissent that is domestic terror. And so they're trying to set out this framing of fatherlessness, in my view, to outlaw divorce. It is really an attack on women. They're not saying women can't be effective mothers on their own. They're saying fatherlessness is a problem. They hide all of the attacks on women behind the term fatherlessness. Yes. And not having fathers. It's a dog whistle. But if you don't know that about this crowd, you don't see it.
Yep.
In a document like this.
And I want to linger on this because it is so mind-blowing to me. Essentially, they're saying women are incapable of raising children without a man's oversight, which would come as a huge shock to my own children, right? I am a very involved dad.
Yeah.
Right. But I'll tell you, I don't know, 2 weeks ago, I'm working, I'm in the kitchen, and I hear my oldest scream, "Dad, Dad," and she's upstairs. And I'm like, "What?" And she's like, "Dad, come here, come here." And I'm like, "What? I'm working. Do you need something?" She's like, "Come here, come here, come here." And so I was like, "Oh God, all right." So I run upstairs and she's in her room and she's like, "Dad, could you get Mom?" And I was like, "You made me come all the way up here just to get Mom?" And it also, I am this, I'm the B team here. I do so much for these kids and this family. I really am very involved, but I'm still the B team. And I want to kind of get, be a little more serious now, because when they ban divorce, they're banning, really what they're doing is saying women cannot divorce men, because it will never fall on men to be responsible for the family. It is, if there is a divorce, whose fault is it?
It is the woman's fault.
Always. That is always exactly how they always see it. You mentioned what is it? NSPM-7.
7, yeah.
So let's talk a little bit more about that, because it ties kind of this, this whole thing together. You said 5 of the 10 line items in the order cover some version of anti-Christian bias. Mm-hmm. So we have hormones that help women. No, you can't do that. You have pride, can't do that. You have divorce, can't do that. What does, and we've talked about NSPM-7 a lot on this, but remind us what it is first.
It is a presidential memorandum that was released last fall that derived from a Heritage Foundation document called Project Esther that was released last April by the Heritage Foundation, who, as a reminder, wrote Project 2025. And what it attempts to do is list things that are domestic terror that can be deemed to be domestic terror by this regime. It had 10 different points. When I list them out, I condense them because it went on too long. But the 5 points that relate directly and meaningfully, they all relate to white Christian nationalism,
Yes.
but they specifically say anti-Christian bias. And when they say that, they mean anti-white Christian nationalist bias. So don't think because you're a progressive Christian or some other kind of Christian that's not a white Christian nationalist, they're not talking about you potentially being a domestic terrorist. You know, telling a white Christian nationalist that they're wrong is anti-Christian.
Right.
So you have to understand how they think to read this document. Also, extremism on gender would apply to these situations that we're talking about, because they could parse both using synthetic hormones to manage conditions for women that they disagree with the use of as extremism on gender, because you should just accept what God gave you and endure it, or be in the body that they think you were assigned at birth and endure it because that's God's plan. So that could be also anti-Christian under these directives that we're talking about today. But then they had 3 hostilities. Hostility against traditional American views, which are traditional American white Christian nationalist views. I mean, traditional American, you can just take that out and substitute white Christian nationalist views.
Yes, always.
On religion, on morality, and on the family. So 5 of the 10 things that they list as domestic terror points in NSPM 7 that they could go after people for are directly and overtly white Christian nationalist things. So this proclamation in Tennessee is setting up a means for the state of Tennessee or the federal government to call out people who refuse to celebrate Nuclear Family Month, who go ahead and have pride celebrations, who continue to take hormones to affirm their genders, who continue to live in same-sex relationships, who live together but aren't married, who are single parents, who are women who are trying to get a divorce, for them to be able to say, these are anti-Christian activities that you're engaging in, and they're in violation of NSPM 7.
Yeah.
You know, when the regime drags out a term like that, it's really important to pay attention. It's not some crackpot thing. You know, they're very good at having the president say certain things, and so many people just don't take him seriously, or they're like, I just can't. But I always try to frame these things as it's a regime move.
Yep.
And so, you know, that was very significant this week. And then to have Caroline Leavitt come back from maternity leave to officially say from a White House press podium that calling the president a Nazi is slander that could be legally prosecuted. You know, those things, these all tie together. So just because they're not coming after people right now over this Tennessee proclamation, it's a reflection of where they intend to go. And that's how my talking about things is different from how a lot of other people do.
Yeah.
I'm not telling you what happened. I'm telling you what I think these things mean for you in the coming weeks and months. And so that gives you a chance to try to work with your communities and get ready and talk to other people, and maybe even get more people involved and waking up and realizing what we have to do to stop these people.
Yeah. And, you know, I would argue that having a position in power, having a person in position of power, such as Leavitt, although, you know, she's just a messenger, she's still powerful. She speaks for the White House. Mm-hmm. Saying those things is actually, in fact, coming at people. Mm-hmm. That is coming at you because it is a threat. It is a stated opinion. It is a state of objective. Look, under NSPM 7 logic, choosing college over early marriage, or refusing
Yes.
a proposal, or seeking divorce from an abusive husband, or getting a tubal ligation. That's all hostility toward traditional American views on the family. And so when you have language like that, it is chilling. You have to think very clearly. It may not be on the books as a law, right? They may not officially or legally be able to come after you for it, but they've said, I'm coming after you for this. And I don't care if it's legal. Like, how many non-white people have suffered at the hands of punishment that is extra legal?
Exactly. And that's, peoples of color in the United States have lived under this kind of system pretty much the whole time the United States has existed.
Centuries.
So it's easier for peoples of color to look at some of these things and go, oh yeah, I see that, because this has been my life in some form or fashion. It's a lot harder for white people to understand that this is also going to be directed at them.
Yeah.
So, but it's really important to take these things seriously. I don't come on here every week and talk to Sam and talk to everybody to try to just be a downer. It's really important to not stick our heads in the sand and realize that when they release all these things in sequence, there is a design to it. They're following Project 2025. And so you can look at what they're saying today and go, this is what they're probably going to do in a month and 6 months. And so what do we need to do now to get ready for that? Instead of just being outraged that they're saying these things today that we never thought they'd do. And I realize that's a different kind of thinking for a lot of Americans, that we're not conditioned to operate that way. But that's how they've operated.
Yes.
They've had a big week of successes this week, and they got there because they sat down 50 years ago or so and said, what kind of country do we want? And they defined that very clearly for themselves. And then they figured out how to get all these different groups involved in making that a reality. And no matter what setbacks they had, they didn't get upset, and they didn't hand wring, and they didn't cry and scream. They went back into a room and said, all right, we had this setback. What can we learn from it so that we can get back on track to getting the country we want? The whole key to how they have gotten to where they are is that they very specifically defined what kind of country they wanted, and they are making it happen. And until we stop chasing all of the bright, shiny objects that they give us every day, and all the chaos and all the outrage and all the fatigue, and sit down together and say, what kind of country do we want? We're not going to be able to come together and defeat them. So it's really important that rather than looking at all of these things that are so frustrating and so demoralizing, we say it is possible to have the country we want. It's still possible. There's so many more of us than there are of them. It's still possible. So it may not happen in my lifetime or your lifetime, but it's still possible. And so we have to get out in our communities and start talking about what kind of country we want.
Yeah.
With each other, and defining what that means, and then working together to build a mechanism through which we can make that happen.
That's a great place to end. I was going to ask, what are concrete steps? But look, I think that, I think there's a finer point here that, Andra, you've been saying, these things will happen. These things will happen. They're happening. These things are happening. And a proclamation coming out of a state house is fundamentally, structurally, in all the ways different than a proclamation coming out of the four walls of a private church in backwoods Tennessee, right? It is migrated from the outskirts of town, the crazy lunatic holding a sign, right, to the church to cable TV and late night TV, evangelists, and all of this, it is migrated into the highest levels of our government. So when they make a statement, it's not just a statement of intent. It is an action. That is an action that they are taking. Mm-hmm. And we need to view it that way. This is not a warning. This is something that's happening now. Mm-hmm. And to counter that, we need to make the world and imagine the world and dream of the world that we want to live in. And it can't just be countering this. It has to be actually saying, this is what we want and this is what we're going to do.
And at the same time, we have to be assembling our communities such that if you suddenly can't get oral contraceptives, if they're suddenly outlawed, how are you going to get them? You know, how are you going to get hormonal therapies if they're outlawed? We're all going to have to figure that out. And the time to do it is not when they say you can't have them anymore and they're illegal. The time to do it is now.
Yeah. Well, with that, Andra, this has been Unholy Ground, or how white Christian nationalists blame women for everything. Thank you. And for all of you in the audience, I'd love to hear what you've done for the National General Boycott, how you've come together as a community, all of those things. When we post this later, make sure you visit the comments and have a chat. And Andra, I think we should do a chat with our audience one time.
I'm happy to do that. I'd love to.
Okay. Thank you all.
Bye, everybody.